Welcome back to On Common Ground with Dusty Keene. Thank you guys for just now joining, listening. We have today's guest, Keven Campbell, a thought leader in the foster care and health and well-being space. He has been on 60 Minutes twice. He's been in the Wall Street Journal. He's been on New York Times for his work, which is way deservingly so. And he's made more of an impact than anyone that I know in more people's lives than anyone that I know. He has worked with our nation's most vulnerable youth, our foster youth, and has made an incredible headroads in the well-being of people in general, as you'll hear through our interview, and the things that he does and what his program is and how he continues to sort of paint a different picture for all of us. We here at On Common Ground with Dusty Keene, the podcast, are fueled by Common Ground's coffee, which is, in my opinion, the most delicious coffee you can find anywhere on the planet, and is one of the coolest spaces, hopefully, you'll ever wander into. So if you're around Greensboro on Walker and Elam Avenue, pop in and check out On Common Ground. We also do delivery till 2 p.m. every day, so you can actually have this deliciousness delivered to you. Whoa, right? So I get caffeinated up every time before my show with Common Ground's coffee. It is, in my opinion, the best you can find. That is something that I promise and do stand by. So if you do check it out, feedback is always welcome on your experience at Common Grounds.
And my question for you is, do not tell me about your regret about the past. Tell me about what you're going to change about the future, because it's the only thing you can influence. Think about medicine. 100 years ago, they were doing, 120 years ago, they were doing surgeries on people without anesthesia because they didn't have it. They were bleeding people because they thought it was the cause of infection. They didn't bleed people because they were trying to hurt them. They bled them because they were trying to heal them. But they were wrong. And medicine had to confront the fact when they discovered these, discovered germs and discovered viruses, that they got it wrong. And they did. And today they save countless lives. We in this system need to be as courageous about our own learning and our own willingness to change as any doctor has ever been, or any researcher, right? We wherever we're at in our lives, we need to remember that the promise of life is growth and change, and we need this system to confront that. And that isn't just about a system changing, it's about people changing. And so, but let me tell you quickly, just because I think it'd be useful to your audience, about a way to think about this health impact. That's not just about child welfare, it's also about you. 3 principles. One is, what is predictable is preventable, right? If you can predict that you might be stressed out right now in this pandemic, more socially isolated than you want to be, and that you notice that as you've been going through this, that what you've been putting in your mouth and eating every day may not be as good for you as it might have been before. You can predict that if you stay at it, you're going to face consequences. You're going to end up with higher blood pressure. You're going to end up, tipping from pre-diabetes to type 2 diabetes. You know that. And so very simply, we need to be constantly reminding ourselves and about the people we love that what we can predict, we can prevent. By the way, there's a balancing act here. Maybe my mental health is better right now because I'm cooking more at home and making more desserts than I ever did. And maybe that actually is working right now for me and my family. I don't think that is the worst decision you ever made. Your mental health really matters. But you got to recognize at some point that you're going to begin to make an adjustment, because you can't keep that up for too long before you're going to end up facing consequences that you don't want to face. What is predictable is preventable. The second one is that our bodies and our brains want to heal, that most of the healing that you will experience in your life comes from your brain and body, not from doctors and not from medicine. In other words, we know that about in your lifespan, that that in terms of your overall health and well-being, our American health system is going to shape about 20% about what happens to you, and the other 80% is going to be the consequence of how you lived. So it points at something, which is, don't look to medicine and psychiatry as the thing that'll save your life unless you've got a condition that can only be saved by those things. You really need to pay attention to the fact that you and your family and your people that care about you have a great deal more influence over what happens to your health than systems do, or even our healthcare system does. So we need to remind people you're really in charge 80% of the time, and don't forget it. And then finally, as I said earlier, your biography is your biology. It isn't about getting it perfectly right. It isn't about living a life without struggle. It is not living a life without stress at all. That's not the goal. The goal is to find some balance between making sure not that, I mean, if you can manage negative things in your life, you should do it. But what you really ought to pay attention to, and the thing that will really make you sick, is not the negative things in your life. It's the absence of good things in your life that will make you sick. It's the balancing between
that's
the good
even
things
down to
and the bad
good
things.
thoughts as well. You know, I mean, that's yeah, people don't really
so what do you
fully
spend
get
your
that.
time? That's right. So who do you spend your time with? What do you spend your time thinking about, or at least some time thinking about, and become intentional about choosing how you're going to spend your time, you know?
Right.
Look, getting back to being being people who are creative, whether you do that with music or with spoken word or written words or a camera, or what it might, but the time you invest in doing those things is part of that balancing act.
Right. And, it's also, so practical, like in practicing, to begin to practice that is so huge. So if you want to learn to play guitar, right, there's really no way around being able to play the guitar to where you can play what you feel. Takes a long time, and you have to repetitiously go through the hurting of the fingers and the push through the barriers that are hard to be able to do it, and even love that process. But that's the same thing of, training yourself to start to think certain ways and create positive thoughts and be aware of how those thoughts make you feel. And that is, I think, a key to a huge mental health, but also, even when you are really mentally healthy, it's super, like, it supercharges your creativity,
Absolutely. And I would just expand on the word feel that you just used, not just your intellectual thought, but pay attention to how it feels in your body.
Yeah.
That is it. What we've got as a society, and we do this to kids in care to their detriment and their parents, is this neck up, psychological, disconnected self way of doing this. What I think people who play the guitar and stick with it are drawn to is not just how they think about the guitar, but how it feels in their body to just quiet yourself and go through the tradition of practicing. Or just, and my dad makes violins. I think the name for this is called a luthier. He makes violins, made other instruments, string instruments. So they were around the house when we were growing up, this sitting everywhere. And the tradition in our house, when you sat down and you didn't have anything else to do, was just pick one up and just sit there and try to pick out a couple of notes. And it's awesome. Just how you live, right? You just pick them up or take a walk, or love your dog. Or I guess if you like cats, if that's possible, you could pet your cat.
It's really, you're absolutely right. And, for me, the whole creative process coming together, always, I'm constantly working on, continuing to be more and more creative. And just even through this pandemic, you and I know each other. I've made movies and I've acted and whatever. And
Yeah.
but I finally recorded a song, and I did that with Angie Aparo, who's going to be on the show, and he's won a couple of Grammys and is just a fantastic writer. But the process of being with him and doing that new thing, and being in the studio with someone that was so good, and the ease of that, and then you surround yourself. It's really important, no matter what your environment is, how little or how big, but to surround yourself with things that do make you feel good and then provoke thought, that you can see and be around and feel and touch and do. And I think that was a prime example of, growing up in your house with your dad and having an instrument right there at any time.
Well, right. And so to get back to the stuff I work on, if I could use the story of my dad, is what, we need to acknowledge that my dad was a career federal employee who was able to stably keep a house over our head, provide for our basic needs, have the extra money around to buy the materials to make those instruments and leave them lying around. That allowed us that example of being able to pick up those instruments or whatever. The point is, the majority of kids that get involved in the system don't come from families that have the same opportunity to do that my white, lower middle class family had.
Right.
And that waiting for them to neglect their kids or hurt their kids and then putting them with some stranger who you're willing to pay enough to keep a roof over that kid's head doesn't make any sense at all, does it?
No.
In fact, intentional or otherwise, what it is a commodification of the children of the poor. We know that 80% of the kids who end up in this care system are there because of neglect, not because their parents abused them, but because they couldn't provide for their basic needs over time in what could have been a very serious way.
And again, a lot of times it's a product of the same system that you're seeing this in. So
it's generational.
It's continuation, right?
But what we would do is what we thought was a great solution was to take those kids and